Wake up. You're fired. Graham Wexley's voice cut through the quiet of the 31st floor at 2:17 a.m. Zariah Whitmore slowly lifted her head from the desk, her cheek marked by the faint warmth of the keyboard beneath it. For a moment she said nothing. The office around her was almost completely dark, except for the cold blue glow of monitors and the thin red light blinking from the server room across the glass hallway. Graham stood over her in an immaculate charcoal suit, his expression already decided. "Sleeping on company time?" he asked. "After everything this company has given you?" Zariah looked at him, then at the clock. 2:17. Her eyes shifted to the monitor. A single line of text had appeared beneath the security dashboard. Transfer authorization pending. $50 million. Her breathing changed, but only slightly. "Sir," she said quietly, "don't shut that computer down." Graham frowned. "You're in no position to give orders." Zariah stood, keeping her hands away from the keyboard. "If you disconnect this terminal, they get the money." Graham stared at the screen. "Who?" She looked toward the dark hallway behind him. "I don't know yet." A notification appeared. Authorization window, 0:25. 25 seconds. Graham's face tightened. "What is this?" Zariah's voice remained steady. "The reason I wasn't sleeping." She turned back to the screen, watching a stream of unfamiliar numbers move across the display. Someone had entered the company's internal network. Someone with credentials that should have been impossible to use at that hour. And whoever it was had chosen this exact moment to move $50 million. Graham reached for his phone. "Security team now?" Zariah stopped him. "No," he looked at her sharply. "Excuse me. If you call them, whoever is watching the system will know we found them." The clock changed. 2 hours 17 minutes and 41 seconds. Zariah's fingers hovered above the keyboard. Graham finally noticed something he had missed all night. Her eyes were not tired. They were focused. She had been watching the same screen for hours, waiting for one mistake. Then another line appeared. "Access confirmed," Zariah whispered. "There you are." The timer dropped to 18 seconds. Graham looked from the screen to the woman he had just fired. For the first time that night, he wasn't wondering why she had fallen asleep at her desk. He was wondering what she had been waiting for. 11 minutes earlier, Zariah Whitmore had been doing the one thing nobody in the building ever noticed. Watching. The 31st floor had emptied hours ago, leaving only the soft hum of ventilation, the distant pulse of server equipment, and the pale glow of security monitors across the darkened office. Zariah sat at her workstation with a paper cup of coffee beside her, untouched for nearly an hour. She was 29 years old, worked the overnight support shift, and had become almost invisible in a company where visibility usually belonged to executives in expensive suits. Most employees knew her as the woman who fixed access problems, reset locked accounts, and quietly answered messages nobody else wanted to handle after midnight. Few knew what she had studied before taking the job. Fewer knew why she had chosen the overnight shift. Zariah had spent years learning how digital systems behaved when people stopped paying attention to them. She noticed patterns. Small ones. A login appearing 3 minutes outside a normal schedule. A device connecting from an unusual location. A security token being used twice when it should have been active only once. None of those things looked dangerous by themselves. Together they formed a shape. That night, the shape had started to become clear. At 1:03 a.m., Zariah noticed a failed authentication attempt from an executive account. At 1:11, the same account appeared again, but from a device registered more than 2,000 miles away. At 1:26, another connection appeared inside the company network. That one bothered her most. It had valid credentials. Someone had not broken through the front door. Someone had been given a key. Zariah opened the security logs and studied the timestamps. Her eyes moved slowly across the screen. She did not panic. She did not call the senior security team. Not yet. She knew what would happen if she reported an uncertain pattern without enough evidence. Someone would glance at the dashboard, tell her everything looked normal, and close the ticket. She had seen it before. The people upstairs trusted green indicators more than quiet employees. So Zariah kept watching. At 1:42 a.m., she found another anomaly. At 1:51, she found a third. Then she noticed something almost invisible in the traffic. A repeated request reaching toward the company's financial authorization system. Her coffee remained untouched. She leaned closer to the screen. The request disappeared. Then it returned from a different internal address. Zaraya understood what that meant. Whoever was testing the system knew enough to hide their trail. She lowered the brightness on her monitor and leaned back in her chair. From a distance she looked exhausted. From the hallway she looked asleep. That was exactly what she wanted. Because if someone was watching the network, she needed them to believe nobody had noticed. And for the next 26 minutes, Zaraya Whitmore sat perfectly still, waiting for the person behind the screen to make one mistake. Graham Wexley had built his reputation on never being surprised. At 47, he had spent years turning a small technology company into a national financial services firm, and he trusted numbers more than instincts, reports more than rumors, and people with titles more than people without them. His office occupied the corner of the 31st floor, surrounded by glass walls and a view of the city that stretched for miles beneath the night sky. At 1:55 a.m., his phone lit up with a message from the chief security officer. Everything normal. No active threats. Graham read it once, set the phone down, and continued reviewing the next morning's executive agenda. He had no reason to think about the overnight support employee sitting several doors away. Zaraya Whitmore was not part of his meetings. She was not copied on executive emails. She did not attend strategy sessions. When something went wrong after business hours, people like Graham expected employees like Zaraya to fix it quietly and move on. That was the hierarchy of the company. And Graham understood hierarchy very well. At 2:01 a.m., he walked out of his office to get coffee. As he passed the security operations area, he noticed Zaraya sitting at her desk with her head lowered. Her monitor was dim. Her hands were still. From the hallway, she appeared to be asleep. Graham stopped. He looked at her for several seconds, his expression hardening. He had already been frustrated by a delayed report, and now he saw an employee sleeping during an overnight shift. He stepped closer. Zaraya. She did not move. Ms. Whitmore. Her eyes opened. She looked up calmly. Yes, sir. Graham glanced at the clock. Do you make a habit of sleeping while you are being paid? Zaraya straightened. No, sir. Because it certainly looks that way. She looked at the monitor, then back at him. I was monitoring a security event. Graham gave a short, humorless laugh. The security team just told me everything is normal. Zaraya paused. She knew that sentence mattered. The official report was clean. The system dashboard was green. But the raw logs told a different story. The dashboard is not showing everything, she said. Graham's expression changed slightly. Then perhaps you should explain why. Zaraya turned toward the screen and pointed to a sequence of timestamps. Someone is using a valid internal credential from an unusual device. Graham leaned closer. Whose credential? I do not know yet. Then you have an assumption, not evidence. Zaraya stayed quiet. She had learned that arguing with someone like Graham only made people stop listening. Instead, she opened another window and displayed the authentication history. 3 entries appeared. Same account. Different locations. Different devices. The pattern was subtle, but it was there. Graham stared at the screen. Why did nobody report this? Zaraya looked at him. Because the system does not consider it unusual. And you do. I do. For a moment neither spoke. Then Graham looked at the clock again. 2:06 a.m. He still believed he was dealing with an employee who had overstepped her role. He did not yet understand that the woman he had just accused of sleeping was the only person in the building who had noticed the warning signs. And somewhere inside the network someone was still waiting for the right moment to make their move. Zaraya watched the authentication log refresh, and one new entry appeared. The timestamp was 2:07 a.m. The account was the same, but the device had changed again. She leaned closer. There, she said. Graham folded his arms. What am I looking at? A pattern that should not exist. She opened the access history and placed the 3 entries side by side. The first connection came from a company laptop registered in Chicago. The second appeared from a device in Virginia. The third was now coming through an internal server on the 31st floor. Graham's expression tightened. Could someone be traveling? Not in 4 minutes. Her answer was quiet, almost matter-of-fact. Graham looked at the screen again. What do you want me to do? Nothing yet. He stared at her. Nothing. If the person behind this realizes we noticed, they will change the pattern. That answer finally made Graham pause. For the first time, he was not looking at Zaraya as an employee who had failed to follow expectations. He was looking at someone who appeared to understand a system he had assumed was secure. Still, his confidence returned quickly. You are an overnight support analyst, Ms. Whitmore. Our security department has people who specialize in this. Zaraya nodded. I know. Then let them handle it. They already did. She clicked another window. A report from the cybersecurity team appeared on the screen. No critical findings. No active intrusion. No unusual activity. Graham read it carefully. So they found nothing. They looked at the dashboard. Zaraya pointed to the raw authentication records. I looked underneath it. The distinction hung between them. Graham had no immediate answer. Then the office lights flickered once. The security dashboard refreshed. Green indicators appeared across the screen. Everything looked normal again. Zaraya did not relax. That is not good, she whispered. Graham turned toward her. Why? Because it just changed. Changed to what? Normal. She opened the previous record and compared it with the current one. The suspicious connection had disappeared. Someone had cleaned the visible trail. Graham finally understood the significance. Can they erase the logs? Not completely. Zaraya moved through several screens, searching for a record that should still exist. Her fingers stopped. They are testing the system. Graham stepped closer. Testing it for what? Zaraya looked at the clock. 2:10 a.m. money movement. The words were simple, but they changed the atmosphere of the room. Graham reached for his phone again. I am calling the chief security officer. Zaraya shook her head. Wait. He looked at her with growing impatience. You have been telling me to wait for 10 minutes. Because we need to know what they are trying to access. And if you are wrong? Zaraya met his eyes. Then you lose 10 minutes. She turned back to the monitor. If I am right, we may lose much more. Graham remained silent. A new notification appeared. Internal payment system. Pre-authorization request. Zaraya's face went still. She clicked it open. The amount was not yet visible. The destination account was hidden behind an authorization layer. But the countdown had already begun. She whispered. They finally made the mistake I was waiting for. The authorization window opened at 2:11 a.m. Zaraya stared at the screen as a number appeared beneath the payment request. $50 million. Graham stopped breathing for a second. That cannot be real. Zaraya did not look away from the monitor. It is real. The destination account remained hidden. But the system had already accepted the first stage of the transaction. A narrow blue bar began moving across the screen. Graham pulled out his phone. I am calling security. Do it, Zaraya said. But do not tell them about the payment. He looked at her. Why? Because the person doing this may have access to their communications. Graham hesitated. He had spent years making decisions in seconds, yet now he was taking instructions from the employee he had accused of sleeping at her desk. He stepped away and called the chief security officer without mentioning the transaction. Zaraya watched the payment sequence. The blue bar moved another few inches. She opened a second terminal and began comparing the authorization request with the company's normal payment pattern. They are using a valid executive credential, she said. Graham turned back. Whose? I cannot tell yet. Can you stop it? Zaraya paused. Not without triggering the security lock. Then stop it. If I trigger the lock too early, the attacker will know we are watching. Graham looked at the screen. How much time? Zaraya checked the authorization sequence. Less than a minute. The room became strangely quiet. Even the hum of the ventilation seemed louder. Zaraya opened another layer of the payment system and searched for the original request. She found a hidden routing instruction buried beneath several legitimate commands. Her eyes narrowed. This is not a normal transfer. Graham stepped closer. What does that mean? The money is being moved through a temporary authorization channel. Can you trace it? Yes. She entered a command and waited. A location appeared. Not Chicago. Not Virginia. Not even another state. The request was being routed through an internal server located on the 31st floor. Graham looked toward the hallway. Someone here. Someone with access to the internal network. The blue bar moved again. 70%. Zariah's fingers rested above the keyboard. She had one chance to block the transaction without shutting down the entire payment system. She checked the authorization token, compared it with the earlier login records, and saw the same irregular pattern. The token had been duplicated. I found the weakness, she said. Graham's voice dropped. What do you need? Nothing. Nothing. Just 30 seconds. The bar reached 85%. Zariah opened a secure control panel and isolated the suspicious authorization channel. The system warned her that closing it could interrupt legitimate transactions. She checked the active payment list. Everything else was normal. Only one transfer was moving through the compromised route. She made her decision. Graham watched her hand hover over the final command. Zariah. She looked at him. Yes. Are you certain? Her eyes returned to the screen. No, a beat passed. But I am certain enough. She pressed the key. The screen froze. The blue bar stopped at 94%. For 2 seconds nothing happened. Then a single message appeared across the monitor. Authorization interrupted. Graham stared at the amount beneath it. $50 million had not left the company. Zariah exhaled slowly. But she did not smile. We stopped the transfer, Graham said. Zariah shook her head. We stopped one part of it. He looked at her. What do you mean? She turned toward another monitor. A second warning had just appeared. Customer data system. Access request detected. The second warning appeared before Graham could respond. Customer data system. Access request detected. Zariah's eyes narrowed. That is the real target. Graham stepped toward the monitor. The $50 million was a distraction? Part of one. She opened the security console and watched the access request move through the system. The payment channel had been blocked, but the person behind it had not disconnected. Instead, the activity had shifted toward the customer data environment. What are they trying to reach? Graham asked. Encryption keys. His expression changed. For our customers? Zariah nodded. If they get those, the financial records become much harder to protect. Graham looked at the clock. 2:12 a.m. Less than a minute had passed since the payment was stopped. Yet the network was already changing again. Zariah opened the authentication history and searched for the original credential. The same executive account appeared. She followed the access trail through 3 internal systems, then stopped at a server labeled Archive Operations. There, she said. Graham leaned closer. What? The account is not the person. He looked confused. Explain. Someone copied the authorization token earlier. They are using the executive account without needing the executive to be online. Graham stared at the screen. Can you tell who copied it? Not directly. Zariah opened another log. But I can tell where it happened. A location appeared. 31st floor. Graham looked toward the hallway. That is here. Yes. The realization settled over the room. Somewhere inside the company, someone had accessed a secure workstation and created a duplicate credential. Zariah began tracing the original access request. The system showed a sequence of connections, each one carefully disguised as routine activity. She followed them backward, one timestamp at a time. 1:03 a.m. failed authentication. 1:11 a.m. remote device connection. 1:26 a.m. internal server access. 1:42 a.m. security log manipulation. 1:51 a.m. financial system test. 2:11 a.m. $50 million transfer attempt. Graham read the sequence silently. You saw all of this before anyone else. I saw pieces, Zariah said. The pieces only made sense after the transfer started. He looked at her desk. The untouched coffee. The dim monitor. The chair where he had found her apparently asleep. So when I walked past you, I was watching the system. Graham lowered his voice. And when I told you that you were sleeping? Zariah looked back at him. I knew you had not seen what I saw. There was no accusation in her voice. Somehow that made the words heavier. A new alert appeared. Access request denied. Zariah had blocked the first attempt to reach the encryption keys, but another request immediately followed. Then another. She quickly checked the source. They are persistent. Graham asked. Can you stop them? I can isolate this server. Do it. Zariah hesitated. If I isolate it, we may lose access to part of the archive. Then we lose access. She looked at him for a moment, surprised by the certainty in his voice. Then she entered the command. The server connection closed. The alert stopped. Silence returned to the 31st floor. Graham stared at the darkened monitor. Is it over? Zariah slowly shook her head. No, she opened the final access record. One connection remained active. It had never touched the payment system. It had never touched the customer database. It had been quietly watching them the entire time. Zariah whispered. There is still someone inside. The final connection remained on the screen, quiet and almost ordinary, as if it had been waiting for Zariah to notice it. Graham stood beside her, watching the line of data move through the system. Where is it going? He asked. Zariah followed the connection backward. It passed through the archive server, then through an internal workstation, then stopped. That is strange, she said. What? The connection is not requesting anything. Graham frowned. Then what is it doing? Watching. She opened the access history and searched for the workstation identifier. A familiar name appeared. Graham leaned closer, then stopped. That cannot be right. Zariah looked at him. You recognize it? Yes. He stared at the screen. That workstation belongs to Daniel Mercer. Daniel Mercer was the company's senior vice president of operations, one of Graham's most trusted executives and one of the few people with broad access to financial systems, customer records, and internal security tools. Graham shook his head. Daniel has been in New York all week. Zariah checked the timestamp. His account is active here. Maybe his assistant is using it. Then why is the account connecting directly to the security archive? Graham had no answer. Zariah opened another record. The workstation had been active at 1:26 a.m., then again at 1:42, and again just moments earlier. Every connection had been carefully spaced apart. It was not random activity. Someone had been moving through the system slowly, trying not to attract attention. Graham's confidence began to fade. Could Daniel have been compromised? He asked. Possibly. Zariah opened the credential history. But look at this. The duplicated token had been created from the same workstation. Graham stared at the screen. So someone used his computer. Or someone with access to it. She continued tracing the activity. A folder opened. Then another. The system revealed a list of internal files that had been viewed during the previous week. None had been downloaded. None had been deleted. The person had simply studied them. They were mapping the system, Zariah said. Learning where everything is. Graham looked at her. How long? Zariah checked the earliest record. 6 days. The room seemed to grow colder. 6 days meant the $50 million transfer had not been the beginning. It had been the moment the plan became visible. Graham looked toward the hallway. Who else has access to that floor? A lot of people during the day. Very few after midnight. Zariah opened the building access records. She searched the same 6-day period and compared every entry with the network activity. Names appeared one after another. Most matched normal schedules. Then one name appeared repeatedly during the exact windows when the suspicious network activity occurred. Daniel Mercer. Graham leaned back slowly. He was not in New York. Zariah did not answer. His badge was used here, Graham continued. But his phone was in New York. Zariah looked at the data again. Then someone may have been using his badge too. Graham stared at her. The executive he trusted most might have been involved, or someone had deliberately made it appear that way. Zariah opened one final record. This time, the system showed a scheduled access request for 8 a.m. The request was aimed at the company's primary encryption vault. Graham's face went still. What happens at 8? He asked. Zariah looked at the clock. 2:19 a.m., Everything changes, she said. Because whoever planned this expects the system to unlock automatically. She closed the window, but not before copying the access signature. Then she looked at Graham. Now we know where they are going. Graham finally understood the truth he had missed all night. Zariah had not been asleep. She had been waiting for the person behind the screen to reveal themselves. And now they had. At 2:20 a.m., Graham Wexley stood in the blue glow of the security room, staring at the name on the screen. Daniel Mercer. For years, Daniel had been one of the people Graham trusted without hesitation. He had helped negotiate major contracts, advised the board, and sat beside Graham during every important expansion. Yet now his credentials were connected to a hidden access pattern that had been active for 6 days. Graham reached for his phone again, then stopped. What do we do? He asked. Zariah looked at the clock. We do not confront anyone yet. Why? Because we still do not know whether Daniel is responsible. Graham nodded slowly. Then what do we know? Zariah turned the monitor toward him. We know. Someone created a duplicate credential. We know they used an executive account. We know they tested the payment system. We know they attempted to reach the customer encryption keys. And we know they expect the encryption vault to become accessible at 8 in the morning. Graham studied the evidence. Can we stop the scheduled access? Yes. Then do it. Zariah shook her head. If I cancel it, they will know we discovered the plan. Graham understood immediately. So we let the request happen. We let the request appear to happen. Zariah created a controlled security environment that would imitate the normal system without exposing the company's actual encryption keys. She moved carefully, checking every permission twice. Graham watched without interrupting. For the first time he noticed how different she looked when she worked. There was no hesitation in her movements. No need for approval. She simply understood what needed to happen and did it. After several minutes, Zariah leaned back. The trap is ready. Graham looked at her. You were certain from the beginning. I was certain something was wrong. She paused. That is different. Graham looked down at the floor. I should have listened to you. Zariah did not answer. When I saw you at the desk, I thought you were careless. He glanced toward the untouched coffee sitting beside her keyboard. I did not even ask what you were doing. Zariah finally looked at him. You saw what you expected to see. The words were quiet. They landed harder than any accusation could have. Graham nodded. Yes. At 2:31 a.m., the security system recorded another connection. Someone had returned to the network. Zariah opened the monitoring screen. The connection entered through the same compromised credential, moved toward the archive, then paused. The person on the other side had sensed something different. They know, Graham whispered. Maybe, Zariah said. Or they are checking whether we noticed. The connection moved again. Zariah captured the access signature and isolated the session inside the controlled environment. Within seconds, the system identified the device used to create the duplicate credential. It was not Daniel Mercer's workstation. It was a maintenance terminal on the same floor. Graham stared at the result. So Daniel was framed. Zariah nodded. It looks that way. Graham exhaled slowly. Then he looked at her. Ms. Whitmore. She turned. Yes. I fired you tonight. Yes, sir. You saved this company tonight. Zariah said nothing. Graham continued, his voice quieter now. And you did it after I told you that you did not belong in that room. He looked at the screen, then back at her. I was wrong. Zariah closed the security console. Then make sure the next person you see sitting quietly at a desk gets a chance to explain why. Graham nodded. You have my word. The clock moved toward 2:40 a.m. The threat was contained for now, but the investigation had only begun. And for the first time that night, Graham no longer saw an employee he had underestimated. He saw the person who had been protecting his company, while everyone else was looking somewhere else. By 8 a.m., the 31st floor no longer felt like the same place. The city outside the glass windows had turned silver with early morning light, and employees were beginning to arrive downstairs, unaware that the company had come within seconds of losing $50 million and exposing some of its most sensitive customer information. Zariah Whitmore remained at her desk, reviewing the final security records. The suspicious maintenance terminal had been isolated, and the scheduled encryption access had been contained inside the controlled environment she created. The investigation team confirmed that Daniel Mercer had not initiated the activity. His credentials had been copied without his knowledge. The evidence pointed toward a contractor who had used an unattended maintenance terminal to create the duplicate access, then quietly tested the company systems for nearly a week. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been permanently changed. But the attempt had been real, and Zariah had stopped it before the damage could begin. Graham Wexley stood beside the window, holding a cup of coffee he had forgotten to drink. He looked across the office at Zariah. She was back at the same desk where he had found her hours earlier. The same chair, the same monitor, the same quiet posture. Only one thing had changed. He now understood what he had been looking at. "Zariah," he said. She looked up. Graham walked toward her and placed a folder on the desk. "Your termination notice." She looked at it without touching it. "You are withdrawing it?" "I am doing more than that." He opened the folder and removed a new document. "The board has approved your appointment as Director of Threat Intelligence, effective immediately." Zariah looked at the page, then at him. "That is a big change for one night." Graham gave a small, tired smile. "It was a bigger mistake to overlook you for this long." She studied him quietly. He did not try to defend himself. He did not mention the pressure he had been under or make excuses for what he had assumed. He simply stood there and accepted the truth. "I owe you an apology," he said. "Not because you saved $50 million. Because I judged you before I understood you." Zariah lowered her eyes to the document. "Thank you for saying that." Graham nodded. Then he glanced at the desk. "You know, I still cannot believe you were awake the entire time." Zariah allowed herself a faint smile. "I was tired." "So you really were resting your head?" "For a few minutes." Graham smiled. "I suppose I owe you an apology for that too." Zariah looked toward the windows. Morning light had reached the edge of the desk, warming the cold blue glow of the monitors. "People see what they expect to see," she said. "Sometimes they just need a reason to look again." Graham stood silently for a moment. Then he walked away. Zariah turned back to the screen. The security dashboard was green. This time it meant what it was supposed to mean. She placed her untouched coffee beside the keyboard, took one quiet sip, and began her new day. On the corner of the desk, the old employee badge still carried her former title. Beside it lay the new one, Zariah Whitmore, Director of Threat Intelligence. She looked at both for a moment, then gently moved the old badge into a drawer. The office filled with morning light. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, the woman nobody had noticed was finally impossible to overlook.